Today's guest is Arthur Hnatek. Arthur is a Swiss drummer who's probably best known for his work with Tigran Hamasyan, an insanely talented pianist who straddles so many musical genres that he could be just as at home on a gig at a jazz club as he could be on a bill with prog metal masters Animals as Leaders. And that gig with Tigran is a very appropriate one for Arthur, as his dexterity as a musician is huge. He weaves his way in and out of all kinds of stylistic settings with ease. In addition to his time spent with Tigran, Arthur works with numerous other artists in and around the jazz and electronica worlds, and has worked as a composer for film as well as a composer for orchestras, string ensembles, chamber ensembles, big bands, and small ensembles. Arthur's also been busy with his own solo electronica project called Swims. I first met Arthur when we produced a series of performance videos with him here in Nashville for Meinl. Arthur's session with us was early on in our journey of producing content, and his was the first shoot where I realized the possibilities of lighting and mood to accompany the artist. You would think that would have been a no-brainer from the start, but for me, his music coinciding with the vibe our videography team set up, it was a real shot in the arm, sort of like, hey, this doesn't have to be paint by numbers, we can really make this thing unique. And that sort of epitomizes how I think of Arthur and his approach to music. He's about as outside of the box as you can get in terms of his musical vision, and I love musicians like that. They're not here to copy what came before them, but to blaze a few new paths on their trek. So I jumped on a call with Arthur, where he was at home in Switzerland and I was here in Nashville, and I picked his brain about his upbringing and his journey thus far. He's an incredibly happy, positive soul, and I think it shows clearly. Enjoy the podcast. So I'd like to welcome everybody into the Meinl podcast. Today we've got Meinl Cymbals artist Arthur Hnatek here with us. Arthur is in Zürich, Switzerland at the moment. I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee. We're doing all of this by WhatsApp, and yay, technology. So Arthur, thank you so much for being on the show, man. It's good to hear from you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's true. Actually, just the fact of you mentioning Nashville just now just brought back those memories of, actually looked it up, it was 2016. So it feels like forever ago, but it was a really cool memory visiting you there.
Oh, dude, it was great having you here. Yeah. That was early on when we started recording video content for Meinl Cymbals, and that was one of the first times where I really was kind of blown away by what the possibilities were, because your drumming and the music that you brought to the table, and then also even that cool lighting that our videographer set up behind you, it just matched the mood. And yeah, man, that was the first time I went, wow, holy cow, this is great.
Wow. No, it's so cool that I was able to be part of this from one of the first ones. Yeah, that's pretty nice.
Yeah. So let's get this out of the way first. You're Swiss, but was your first language German, French, Italian, or how do you say it, Romansh?
No, actually, it's French. My main language is French, but it is true that in Switzerland we have this kind of like thing going on where there's actually four official national languages. So I heard a lot of German. You basically have to take German at school everywhere. So I would say my German is okay. And then I learned English kind of early on, as a lot of kids do. And then, moved to the US, and that was helpful, I guess, to get that going. But my Italian is close to zero. I can't say I'm that good.
Yeah.
And the Romansh it's cool that you bring this up. I mean, it's a very small portion of the country that's speaking that language, but it's actually where my girlfriend is from, so I get to visit there, and it's super cool. It's pretty trippy. I can actually understand a lot of it because it's close to French, but it sounds almost like Latin, and it has a bunch of different mixes.
And she speaks, is that her native language?
I mean, her whole family, she grew up in Zürich, so German is her main language, but she can understand it. And, it's basically high up in the mountains that people mostly speak this language. So you have to get out of cities if you want to hear it more.
Yeah, I knew that it was that Romansh was very seldomly spoken in Switzerland, but it's actually one of the four national languages there.
Yeah, it's true. And basically all the major texts have to be written in all of those four languages in order to be official.
Wow, that's interesting. So your parents owned a music store in Geneva, and so you've been surrounded by music from the start. What was the first instrument that you gravitated towards that you began playing?
I'm half ashamed to say that I actually played the recorder. I think as the recorder flute when I was a kid, like really early on. I guess I was like maybe 4 or 5, I guess. And then I gravitated to piano. Also, I actually had a few years of studying piano before starting the drums. Yeah, and when I was 8, actually. Yeah.
Okay, and with the recorder, did you become somewhat decent at it, or was it literally just you did it for a couple of weeks?
I mean, no, it's probably a few years. I mean, it's like, my parents, their music store is actually only woodwind and brass instruments. So there was actually no drums there. So it's also quite funny that I ended up choosing one of the only instruments they didn't have. So maybe the recorder is basically just being, it was just, I could pick it up. It was just laying around. And I guess as a kid, it's also quite easy to start with that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, when and how did you come to love jazz?
That came, I would say, a bit later, because even if my parents, they like, let's say jazz music and more contemporary music, they were also listening to a lot of classical music, and a lot of their customers are mostly classical musicians. So I was surrounded by classical music a lot, and the jazz came from probably my first teacher when I started studying drums when I was 8. This guy was a jazz drummer, so he, just the way he was teaching and was based around what he loved, and that those were like the classic jazz things. So he basically is the first one who was like, hey, check this out, learn this, learn that, and I was still kind of listening to a lot of different kind of music, and also listening to a lot of, let's say, more fusion rock drummers. But yeah, it's this guy. And then very quickly on in Geneva, there was this jazz school. And as a kid, I was able, when I was maybe 12, to go and take a combo, like a ensemble with other kids. And that was all jazz. It had to be, because it was in a jazz school. So I was basically thrown into it without really kind of like deciding also that I was, into doing this kind of music. It was just a lot of teachers around me. They were like, hey, check this out. And this is Tony Williams and, stuff like that.
Well, jazz is not necessarily known as a rebellious music. Traditionally speaking, it would be rock. So as a kid, were all of your buddies listening to rock and things like that, and there you are, the jazz dude?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And that went for a long, really long time. Basically until I started meeting other quote unquote nerdy kids, because of course at school and the other people that, the other kids that were not necessarily into music, they were listening to pop music and other things, and not a whole lot of like, punky rock people around me. I don't know if this is where I'm from or, I don't know, the neighborhood I grew up in, but it was, I guess, yeah, a lot of kids were more into basic rock and pop music. And I was definitely a bit lame with all those jazz stuff laying around for quite a while,
No,
I can't
dude,
say so now.
Hey, man, I think it's cool that you were different.
I mean, yeah, nowadays I'm pretty happy, but it was true that back then I was like definitely a bit on my own.
So let's see. When would this have been? Which year would it have been where you really were, where you had your teachers that were putting jazz records in front of you to listen to? When would this have been? What time frame?
Basically from when I'm 12 to when I'm, right after finishing high school. So from 2002 up to when I moved to New York, which is 2009. So from 2002, yeah, basically.
Got it. Okay. So at that time, were there a lot of new jazz albums coming out that you were taking in, or was it just study the classics kind of thing?
I guess it was a bit of both, It was, of course, still the kind of like the moment where there was a lot of also people mixing. I mean, of course, that was for a long time, but I was also kind of discovering the stuff like Steve Gadd was doing, and and Dave Weckl, of course. It was a bit that moment where, so the newer stuff that I was checking out was maybe more towards the funky fusion-y stuff. And then there was this whole kind of like back catalog that I was trying to get to. And actually, it's funny because it really happened when I moved to the US, which was a pretty clear moment where you meet other people that went really thoroughly through the tradition. And I was a bit like, oh, wow, I actually didn't really do my homework up until now. So I actually started listening a bit more of those classics a bit later on, I would say. Yeah.
So I'm curious, were there any jazz albums that you thought of as being sort of dangerous? I know that's an odd question, but there's some safer melodies, and then there's some more kind of dark, insidious kind of melodies and harmonies going on, and dangerous drumming. You know, when I listen to a guy like, say, one of our cymbal artists, Ralph Peterson, that guy takes chances nonstop. I mean, the way he plays, it's almost like he's trying to wreck his car, but you know he's never going to wreck his car because he's in total control the whole time. My point is that he takes chances, and it's kind of dangerous. Were there any jazz artists like that for you that were, you know, when you wanted to be rebellious in jazz world, that's what you listened to?
Oh, wow. That's a cool question, because I think, yeah, I think I was struggling a bit no matter what with this concept that jazz was this music that I was kind of studying. It felt like it was an important thing to check out. But it is true that most of the time when for my own kind of pleasure, I would tend to gravitate to other kind of things. So maybe that was the dangerous part for me, at least as a kid, checking out music, was to be like, hey, why don't I just also all of a sudden get into, let's say, more aggressive kind of music? So then me closer to heavy metal kind of music, and of course checking out Meshuggah and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I wonder, within the jazz world, I guess it's only kind of going backwards that I realized, oh my God, there was all those drummers basically playing with all that power and that energy, that even though it was so long ago, you know. So I don't know. I don't know if I could figure out an album or a drummer's name that would be this rebel side.
No, it's cool.
Like
I mean, I know it's a totally random question.
No, but it's cool. It's a good one.
Well, I have one more thought that just came to mind. So jazz seems to be this, it's this American invention from the African American experience. So you've got European harmonic, the European like harmonic aspect of it, but then you've got this African American rhythmic aspect that's the underlying foundation. So for me, being a real purist for rock, I always go back as far as I can, and I dig back as far as I can go until there's nothing left as far as recordings to be had. So I really try and study the history. So in jazz, being a student of it, did you ever take the time and go backwards and study what came from what and what came from what?
Oh yeah, totally. Even though this kind of process was less geared towards drums, but more towards the music, you know, and just the fact also that I then attended a quote unquote jazz school. You know, I was at the New School for Contemporary Jazz in New York, and I guess it's a bit different than other schools, music school like music universities, where they're quite modern in the way of thinking, but they, like any jazz school, they really take seriously the fact that you have to take a jazz history thing and you have to write an essay and all that stuff, you know. So I think it's kind of also then that I realized, oh, okay, now I'm basically in New York City. For some people, this is real, you know, tradition. It's real heritage. You know, a lot of people around me, other kids from the US, they actually knew a bit more about it, I think, than me, just because they were closer to it, you know, like you mentioned, you know. So it's only then that I realized, okay, there must be something to be learned by going backwards, and I it's funny how my process of learning music, I don't know if it's because I'm from a really tiny country in the middle of Europe, but it happened in a kind of different way, So I did this kind of going backwards, but a bit later in my discovery of the music. Yeah.
Well, I think when you were here in Nashville back in 2016, I seem to remember you telling me that your experience, your time in New York City, was a really big deal for you. It left a serious impression on you. And
oh yeah, completely. Yes. Yeah.
So aside from the school experience, or maybe that is the epicenter of it, but it sounds like you had quite the education when you were there. What other aspects about being in New York City really defined and was like a turning point for you?
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned the school because I talked about it. The school was cool, of course, but actually I wouldn't say that it was the most important part of it. And this is still what I say to actually quite recently one of my students, during those online times, I had a quick chat with someone who was asking me if I thought it's important to move to a big city like New York or whatever. And I think what I said is like the school is one thing, but it's mostly the fact of moving to a place where you meet a whole lot of different people that are similar as you and that are coming from so many different places. I mean, that was the crazy thing about New York. You move there, you're into jazz, you know all those standards, you can play, you want to improvise, and then you meet all those different kids from your age that are coming from Japan and Chile and France and wherever in the world, and you all meet in that one place to do only one thing, because no one has families anymore. No one has, it's just this thing of like you there, and that's the only thing you care about is the music. So of course the school is where you meet those people, but very quickly on you also realize, this is a tiny thing. It gets really exciting when you start going out and going to concerts and discovering the music from up close, and I think this is what made the biggest impression on me was just to discover this music from right there, and to be able to go and listening to that same drummer 20 times, and go back to those small clubs and hearing that music, and then go to the school the following day and practice all day and all that stuff. It was really like a routine thing that happened, surrounded by similar-minded people from my age, and then just this kind of drive, like you only have one thing to do when you're there, So it did make a big impact, and then with the kind of like thinking back to the past, it just made a big impact also on the type of people I met and the type of people I started playing with, that I still collaborate, and even most of my projects today, they're somewhat linked to New York. Even if I moved away from there some years ago now, it's still, I made some really strong relationships and friendships there,
Well, I think you may have just answered my next question that I had for you.
Okay.
Sorry. No. That's actually a good thing. What I was going to say is your musical training is pretty formal. And I was going to ask, what would you say has been the most influential time of informal training that you've had, like some kind of situation that you couldn't get at a conservatory or a school? Now, you mentioned your experience that school was just one small part of being in New York, and that everything else made up the bigger part that left an impression on you. So maybe that's it. But okay, for a thought exercise, let's go outside of your time in New York and that informal training you had. Outside of the informal training in New York City, what's another time where you've had some informal training where it just really, really, there was a large amount of information being brought to you in a short amount of time?
That's a good one too.
I was going to guess that maybe it might have been.
Okay.
I was going to guess it might have been the first tour that you went on, like the first proper real tour that you may have done.
Yeah, probably that's the thing that's also quite crazy is the first proper tour I've ever done, really as like a, let's say, part of a band, was actually with Tigran Hamasyan, and. That's the thing that's crazy is I met him quite slowly. I don't know if you can say this, but I met him I met him many times during those 5 years I was in school in New York. Actually met him quite, let's say, quickly on. He was coming through the city and stuff like that. So I met him a few times, never really playing with him, but he was always like a friend of a friend, or he was playing and I was going to check him out or whatever. And so this is also something that I often tell people, because it seems those days there's some kind of urgency. People always think things need to happen really fast. Like you meet someone and then a week later they call you and you're in the band and you're going on a world tour. And I was trying to bring up the point that actually no, those deeper relationships and those things that you build with playing music, they happen naturally and progressively. You meet someone once, maybe you play, but then that's it. And then 2 years go by and maybe you meet again. And so I guess meeting Tigran and then all of a sudden him, quite out of the blue, I would say, just that first gig, it was not a tour even, it was just a gig. It was just, hey, can you do that one date? Nate Wood can't do it. Do you want to do that one show? And so it was quite a lot of work to just get all those tunes ready just for one show. Also, he told me we can't really rehearse. It's going to be like a, sound check and play style thing.
Wow.
And so that was, I guess, Informal in the way that I knew his music. I was a fan, but I had never really sat down to play all those parts and really check it out. And so he sent me that small email saying like, hey, we're going to be playing those tunes. Here, YouTube links. Also, he didn't send me recordings. There were actual YouTube links of like iPhone recording of a guy at a club, filming the trio. And the reason is they didn't have those songs recorded. They were basically arrangements of other tunes and whatever. But so I get all those pretty crappy recordings and pretty sketchy kind of combination of things. And it was just like, hey, I don't remember how long it was, but it was like a few weeks, I don't know, a month, I don't remember. But this was a moment where like, okay, put aside all this cool stuff. It's just how you're going to apply this and learn this music very fast. And I guess that could answer your question maybe somewhat.
Yeah, I would assume that having to take on a gig like that with an artist like Tigran and just be given some YouTube links and really and no rehearsals and then have to do a gig, I would assume when the gig was done, you probably gained quite a bit of self-confidence from that situation.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because I remember feeling quite ready. I remember not approaching this thing and, I drove with him and Sami and I, the bass player, we took the car from New York and drove up to wherever it was, a few hours away. And I remember being like, no, I get, I have it, I can play those songs. I was not doubting it. But Tigran is also quite a interesting character, I don't remember him necessarily jumping around after the show and being like, oh my God, you did it. It was cool. He basically said, cool.
Well,
or whatever.
hey.
It was a really like, it made me feel okay. It worked, but all in all, I should actually ask him if he has any memory of that show. But I think I came out of it thinking more like, okay, I can do those things, of learning quite dense material in a short amount of time and then being able to play and feel comfortable. And then pretty quickly after that, he asked me for a bunch of more stuff. So that was more the moment where that moment he calls me and says, hey, are you free from September till January? It was like a 4-month, non-stop tour. And then that felt more like, okay, I guess it worked out,
But, yeah, sure.
So that, I think I had that shot of adrenaline more during that phone call than right after that first gig.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
I guess.
Hey, at the end of that first gig, no news is good news as far as I'm concerned. So if he just said, yeah, cool, that's all you need to hear.
Maybe. And now that I know him also, he's not like, he's quite discreet with his, with the way he communicates. Yeah.
Well, so I was going to ask you a little bit more. I had a random question about your gig with Tigran. So for those that are not aware of Tigran Hamasyan, he's a jazz, and I almost feel he's kind of a world pianist. You recorded his latest album with him, and you guys were getting ready to go tour behind it before this whole COVID mess hit. But Tigran's music has been really influential on progressive metal bands. Have you ever wanted to go on tour with Tigran with bands like Animals as leaders?
It's funny that you asked this. I'm not sure how much I can answer without kind of distorting the facts, but if I may, I think it actually it was mentioned many times that it could happen. You know, meaning that I think the guys from Animals they basically asked Tigran if he would want to be interested in opening for some of the shows or stuff like that. And if I recall correctly, Tigran just said no every time. And the one of the main reason I think is he wants to play on a grand piano, on a like a big piano, an acoustic piano. And a lot of those venues, they sometimes don't have pianos. And also maybe the guys from Animals, they said, hey, your setup needs to be a bit, scale down if you want to just play, the first set, and then, I don't know. And maybe it was some logistics stuff like that. But last time I actually talked to Tigran, I asked him, hey, did they ever reach back again? Or I don't know, is there another band that reached out? And he's been saying that kind of yes, I think he's in contact with those people quite often. But Tigran just maybe, I don't know. He prefer, I think, to do his own shows. Well, I don't know. But it's true that, like you say, there's the big community of like rock drummers and prog, like metal guys that are now super aware of Tigran's music, and it's super funny. It's some friend of mine sent me a recording of like and now of course it's Matt Halpern, great drummer, also Meinl.
Yeah, plays in Periphery.
Periphery, of course. So some guy a friend of mine sent me a recording of like right before the Periphery, show in this giant venue. They're basically playing Tigran's music as background music before the show. So it was just funny to hear this music played back in those kind of venues. And to be honest, I would have such a good time as a drummer playing those kind of shows because they're quite different crowds, and I think it could be fun. So I really hope that Tigran at some point says, you know what, let's take a electric piano and let's do it.
Dude, I think you guys would slay those audiences. I mean, they would.
Yeah, I think it would match well. Yeah,
they would not. They wouldn't know what hit them. It would be so great. You have so many people there that are just lovers of music, and
that's true. Yeah.
You have to really invest your ears and your brain into music like that. It's not just beer drinking music. It's way beyond.
Of course,
that.
Yeah.
So
that's
they'd
true.
be really into it.
Yeah, I think it would be fun. It's up to him.
Yeah, of course. Well, you're so diversified in terms of your musical accomplishments. Film composer, a composer for orchestra. You've done big bands, string quartets. I think I read somewhere you've done some chamber ensembles. You're a producer. As we've spoken about, you're a sideman for notable artists like Tigran, also Eric Truffat. Did I say his name right?
Yeah, good.
Okay.
All good.
You're a band leader for your own groups. You've got your current electronica project, Swims. So with all that diversification, if you were to meet the average person on the street and they asked you what you did for your job and you said musician, and then they said, well, what kind of music? What would you tell them?
I think it's more maybe a rule that I set up because it is true that sometimes you're like, what do you want to say, But I think often I use the word jazz when I have to answer. It's somewhere in there. And it's not necessarily that the kind of music, even going back to Tigran, could you argue this is jazz? It's not really, maybe. It's a mix of a bunch of things. It's for sure rooted in this tradition, but it's hard to say. But I kind of enjoy saying it because I have a feeling it projects something else about it, It's also quite, it's a weird word, A lot of people don't really understand what is jazz even, So I think it's almost like a game when I say, like, what kind of music do you play? I say jazz, even though it's not really what I do. It's just, I think it's a good way to say, I'm into quite, let's say, complex music. No, I don't know. But, music that has a lot of like different, backgrounds and that most of the time quite, nerdy, maybe, that make recall, that references a lot of different things, and I think it would be wrong to just say no techno, even though I love techno, and in many ways I would love to be able to say no, I do techno, but it's not true actually. So I jazz is a good, it kind of has a, and I truly love the heritage of jazz musicians in general. So
yeah,
there's also that. Yeah.
Well, man, a completely strange question just came to my mind talking about that answer you would give to the average person. Have you ever dated a girl that was completely bored by the music you played?
Yeah, probably yes. Yeah, but probably the main way I'm thinking about one person specifically is she really just kind of avoided the whole topic. So she didn't just say like, "Oh my God, I'm so bored with this music" or whatever. She just kind of just was not into coming to concerts or or sharing that side of my life. It was not super easy.
Yeah, I was going to say that wouldn't be, considering that your career is basically more or less is your life. I mean, you have to spend so much time. It's not just 9 to 5 where you clock in and clock out. So
for sure, yeah.
Yeah, no, I know that's a random question, but I figured I had to ask. Well, I mentioned Swims, your current electronica project. So tell us about how that came to life. And I think you've gone on the road. You've done a few gigs just by yourself with Swims. I think I've seen pictures of you having done that. What's it like taking it on the road, and just how did the project come around?
Yeah, it's basically what I'm doing most of the days right now. Those I would say the last 2 years. It's been really a main focus. I mean, it comes really from my love of electronic music. At first, discovering FX Twin a while ago, and discovering also more like functional music, like dance music, techno, and all that music that you're supposed to hear in those dungy clubs in Berlin and stuff like that. It's funny. It's maybe the opposite. I was talking about really complex music, and in a way, this electronic music and dance music has something very simple about it, but so satisfying to me. And so I was always really into this kind of music, and I always made a lot of music like that, with my computer and with synths and a lot of electronic instruments. And I was just making it for myself, just for the fun of trying to get to it with this kind of music. And it's only recently that I was like, okay, but maybe there's a way that I can include this in my drumming, And it's also a comment that I get often, people hearing me playing just acoustic drums, and they're like, oh my God, it makes me think of electronic drums, or it has this very, very kind of computer style rhythmically thing, which it's true. It's a big influence on my drumming, all those electronic beats, let's say. And so it was just this idea of like, maybe there's a way that I can combine those two things, and perform live without necessarily just becoming a DJ or just playing, with only a few instruments. I did a few shows where I did not have a drum set. It was just, drum machines and other instruments. And a lot of people that knew me, they came after the shows and they were like, yeah, it was cool, but why don't you play drums? You're playing that way no matter what when you play drums. So
yeah.
So it came from that. It came from, can I play this kind of music that technically should be played quite loud at really late stages of the night, and for people that either want to listen but also want to dance. And yeah, it just came from that love of this kind of music, and how can I combine those two things, Yeah.
When you play shows, you've played some shows as Swims, correct?
Yes, yeah. So actually, yeah, the term, this thing Swims came from me just producing music and putting it out, and then thinking, okay, how can I perform this? And now I'm at the version where I'm playing solo, because I actually tried many versions. Swims existed as a duet, existed with a band. And so it's just cool because I'm able to play the same music just with a bunch of different ensembles. And playing solo is just such a challenge. It's so hard to play drums and electronics and play full concerts, and it's I take it more as a challenge right now. It's also very easy to practice with this. It's the opposite of the classic, you only get the rehearsal with your band once a week or whatever. I just love the fact that if I want, I can practice every day, all day. And so it's very liberating to play by myself, but it's also quite challenging.
Well, you're a real sonic seeker in my mind. When I listen to you play drums, that's what I hear. I hear about a guy that's always looking for the next kind of sound. So I wonder, is it sometimes hard for you to find the sounds you hear in your head from the companies that you endorse, or is that sort of a limitation, a thing of the past, and now you're pretty much able to get what you need?
That's and you're talking about acoustic instruments right now,
right? Because you mentioned that
yeah.
when you play drums and do this with Cymbals, a lot of the sounds you've come up with on your acoustic kit, people say, "Wow, that sounds very electronic." Now, I know you incorporate electronics as well, but so yeah, on the acoustic kit, trying to make electronic sounds, has it been tough to be able to do that, or is it pretty much what you need's at your fingertips?
Yeah, I mean, it's been also like a lot of inspiration from other people. I'm obviously not, the first guy to do this, and there's a lot of drummers that been toying with this and like thinking about how can you make an acoustic instrument sound more electronic, and it's pretty a lot of people are using those tools all the same time. It's like whatever the choice of cymbals and whatever percussion that you can add on top of the drums and all that stuff. But actually, I believe it's more about the phrasing. It's more about the way you play. There's this amazing drummer called D'Antoni Parks, who's actually playing with just a hi-hat, and a snare drum and a kick drum, and he actually gets sounds that sound electronic. So it just proves the fact that you don't have to go into crazy, games of trying to create the craziest sound with a combination of gear. It actually should come with the way you play first. But since I've been doing and been interested in this, it was just a natural evolution of like trying things out. And of course, the collaboration with Meinl's been super important throughout the years, because I was always able to like, oh, this is cool, how can I use this, and how can we combine sounds? And also it seems a lot of people playing Meinl are interested in those things. I see a lot of really cool drummers doing similar kind of stuff. So it's always cool to see that how can you use one tool, basically a cymbal or whatever, or percussion, in so many different ways, and to make it sound in so many different ways again. Yeah.
Well, okay, I've got a random question to ask you. Here's your time to be embarrassed. So what I want to know is do you know the term guilty pleasure?
Yeah.
Okay, so who are the guilty pleasure artists that you listen to, and the artists that people would be really surprised by, and what do you enjoy about their music?
Oh, wow. There's probably so many, and because I wish I could actually have thought about this one. Because there's a thing about, again, because I'm more playing complex music and stuff like that, sometimes people don't imagine that I could be listening to straight up pop music,
I would imagine you would have to, well, not to interrupt, but I would imagine that listening to straight up pop is probably a very healthy thing for you, because it almost sort of clears your head of the complexity. And
for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
There's that, and there's also this daring, you can find complexity everywhere if you look for it, And since I'm very interested in electronic music and production, sometimes I'm listening to those songs that just have two chords and it's just a 4-on-the-floor kick pattern, and then so well produced and mixed and stuff like that, Just, even the last Billie Eilish record, I don't know if you heard that. I guess that would fall into the guilty pleasure, maybe.
You know what? I have to say, I've never really listened to her too much. It's funny. I listen to what I listen to, and then I'm sort of forced to listen to whatever my wife and daughter are listening to.
Of course, yeah, sure.
I think I know what you're talking about, because there were a few years there where in the car, say on a road trip, I was forced to listen to Taylor Swift because my daughter was listening to Taylor Swift. And say what you will about Taylor Swift, everybody has their opinion, but my opinion is that I heard a lot of really well written songs that were quite simple, but I heard a producer behind her that chose the perfect moments for, say, that one crash cymbal.
Right,
Or
of course, yeah,
so I know
totally.
what you mean. It's like really simple, but where you place it and how you produce it, I mean, it can be flat out
Yeah, and
really
I'm super
intelligent.
super into that, you know. And I really spend a lot of, and I have a couple of friends also that around me that are really not into the style of music that I listen to and all those quite dark, complex stuff. And they're just, and we often, you know, have such a great time listening to those other kind of music and to be like, wow, can you hear it? How did they mix this voice track? And it's so amazingly made, you know. There's like, actually in country music, there's a lot of this. It's always funny to me also, especially I guess maybe that's a European thing, you know, where country music doesn't really hit much of the European market, I guess. I mean, I'm saying this from my own bubble, you know. And then all of a sudden the Grammys turn around or whatever, and you're like, oh, best country artist or whatever. And you go listening to that song, and it's like millions of hits and like such large numbers and so many people listening to this music. You listen to this and you're like, okay, yeah, it's really well produced, like the drum sound. And sometimes it's really interesting how that kind of music can be satisfying in another way, even though it's like from it's like a sub side of the world where you like never heard of those artists that are basically filling up, you know, stadiums.
Yeah, no,
So this is
that's
quite satisfying also. It's always to like, okay, just realize that you're always surrounded by your own bubble stuff, and you know, and all of a sudden you discover something else that's just giant somewhere else. And that's probably true for like K-pop or whatever, you know, which I don't know that well. But I definitely get a kick out of pop music very often, yeah.
so. I've noticed that there's this when I go to Europe for work to Germany, I'll hear pop music that, of course, I would never hear
Of
over
course,
here
yeah, yeah.
in the U.S. And like you said, there's music that sells big time over here that you would never hear where you are. When you're listening to pop, do you listen to pop that primarily comes from countries in Europe, or do you listen to pop from the U.S., or is it just kind of whatever?
No, I think I have a feeling still the pop world from the US is pretty big. You know, even though these days the pop world and the kind of hip hop world are a bit, you know, very similar in the way of how big they are. But no, I have a feeling still. I mean, maybe it's also because you know, a lot of my friends and the way I discover music is still very much related to, like, let's say, more Western way of thinking about stuff. I don't know. So I guess I hear about US pop music more often than the European stuff, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah.
Well, I have one last thing I wanted to ask you. As we all know, it may unfortunately be a while before live music venues are up and running again because of COVID. So, how have you been keeping yourself busy during this time? What have you been up to?
Yeah, it's been funny. It still kind of feels like a roller coaster. I mean, it's a bit different than in the US. We kind of got a earlier wave in a way. So actually, up as of yesterday in Switzerland, it's opening back up slowly. You know, a lot of European countries right now, you know, stores are allowed to open and stuff like that. So it feels like we're getting out of a thing, but obviously concerts and all those big gathering will be the last thing that come back. That's pretty clear, you know. So for me personally, it was, you know, I had a lot of mixed feelings. You know, the first, you know, that first major festival I was supposed to play with Swims, my solo thing, actually opening up for Snarky Puppy. I was going to play at this festival in Switzerland called the QE Jazz Festival. That's one of my favorite places in the whole world. It's a really cool 1 week festival happening here, and I was really excited to play my own music on the big stage before Snarky Puppy. It was going to be a lot of people there. It's going to be fun, you know. And then that's the first thing that got canceled for me. So that was a pretty major bummer, you know. It was like first you sad, you a bit, pissed off by the whole situation, but you take it very personally, and then slowly everything else got canceled, and then it was the US tour with Tigran, and then it was more shows with my own solo, and then there was like more and more, and then the more stuff got canceled, the kind of like the freer I felt. It's funny because it reached a point where we were all in my community, at least all basically being hit equally by the same things, that my reaction was like, okay, there's nothing you can do about it. The most important things we need to do right now is make sure that the health of people around us are taken care of. So it became like a less of, oh my God, I'm pissed for my own, it was less kind of egocentrical aspect of thinking, oh my gigs. It was less like, oh no, we as a community, as a society, we need to react to this well now. So the concerts, they can wait, And actually that felt I felt freeing, because immediately the following day I woke up and started this routine where I wake up early and I work a lot. I've never worked as much as right now, it seems. Just going to practice, going to create new music for my electronic project. I've been, making more videos than ever. I've been, kind of more creative for some reason. And this happened because I just all of a sudden had time. I went from having the most busy, months of March and April, and I was going to fly to LA, practice with Tigran, and then go on this crazy tour, fly back, then have 2 days off, and then have to go up to, this other festival in France. It was going to be insane. And then all of a sudden, you have 2 months of nothing. And so that felt quite freeing, and I actually enjoyed it. Right now, where I am now, it feels more like, okay, we kind of like how long, you kind of want to know how long is this going to go for.
Yeah, you and everybody.
Yeah, so it feels like, you're like, okay, do I have to get prepared that this is going to be until September, or is it in December, or is it actually June, or is it, So these questions are annoying, but when I forget about the question, I actually have really nice days. The weather is incredible in Switzerland right now. I can go out and walk to my, rehearsing space, and I have a really nice view outside, and I can, it's really cool, it's really comfortable these last few days. So I feel, grateful that I can go through this crazy time with still quite a nice way of living,
Man, I got to say, I really respect your sunny attitude about it all. That's a good way to be. It's so interesting that once you put down the sort of inner turmoil, then suddenly you just were completely at peace with it. I think that's really cool.
I mean, yeah, it happened naturally, and it surprised myself too, because I am and I was deeply sad about all those concerts, that I was basically booked for a year before, it was so set into stone that this was going to happen. And then when you see everything just fall apart, if you keep this anger inside, it's not going to be, it's going to be very hard.
Yeah, no, that's not productive at all.
Yeah.
Well, Arthur, man, dude, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you, Chris. Of course.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And, I hope that I see you on the road sooner than later, actually.
Yeah, that would be great. I was actually gonna, we never, with Tigran, we don't get so much chance yet to come play in Nashville, but I hope this is gonna happen or somewhere close by.
Yeah, and I'll be there for sure.
I will definitely let you know. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.